We're going to now have Jeff respond briefly to Daphne's comments. There is some discussion that we can have. We're running a little bit late, but we want to make sure that there's the possibility for some people of the audience to ask questions. So I suggest that we have about 5 minutes of discussion between the two of you and then open it out. Thank you very much. Yeah.
What's up?
Hey!
Berkeley in the house.
Berkeley in the house. What's up?
Minneapolis. Yay! We're so honored to be here.
Likewise,
Yeah.
likewise. That was. Thank you for that amazing.
Thank you for that.
Presentation. Gosh, there's so many things that I only have a few minutes to just say. So a couple things. One of the things is gosh, Prince playing Heroes.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
How many of you heard him do that live? Because he did it in Atlanta a couple times. Yeah. And in Toronto. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah.
New Zealand?
New Zealand. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. When I first put the conference together, people were kind of going, "Really? You're going to do the both of them?" I'm like, I can't not think them together. I mean, I think for some of us, generationally, the kinds of boundaries that you were talking about that he so, brilliantly, disrupted and transgressed, allowed for that kind of bilateral cross-listening. And, the kind of deep study that I put into Bowie, especially of late, was trying to think about his blackness, which he really held onto as a form of study, going back to Little Richard. But that through line to Prince, I mean, it just made a lot of sense to me. So.
Yeah. And then the dialogue between the two, thinking about how Bowie's hearing Prince in '81 and then coming back with Let's Dance.
Yes, exactly.
And rethinking all the stuff that he's doing.
Absolutely.
But Prince doing Heroes right now, in this particular moment, the lasting image for me of Heroes is the lovers embracing and kissing at the wall.
At the wall, with the shots
Yeah.
flying above our head.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And him playing that.
Yes.
And in front of this image of fractals, which Adrienne Marie Brown reminds us is about finding the universe in the minuscule. And that brings me to thinking about sort of the idea of the children.
Yes.
And the idea of Prince's sort of relationship to children, and the tragedy that he was not able to see his son, survive, and just anyway, all these things. But the deepest part of it too is thinking about the continuities that you kind of drew out, the generational continuities, and the sort of continuities between culture and politics, the dialectic between Black freedom culture and Black freedom movements. And the impact that's had on people like David Bowie and obviously all of us.
Yes.
So
it all came from you.
No.
So thanks
Came
for
from
that.
Prince.
Yeah, it came from
Came
Prince.
from Prince.
Came from Prince. Yeah.
Bowie.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Thank you. Maybe we should see if people want to.
We only have a few minutes?
Yeah,
Sure.
I know.
Okay.
People should talk to us.
We'll talk to everybody.
Is there a mic
Yeah.
in the? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Very brief. I thought that was great, by the way. So you talk about Prince's relationship to race and sexuality and gender, but what about class?
Sure. Yeah.
So, I think this is kind of, really there in all of his music, is he never forgets where he came from. The fact that he was homeless as a teenager, that he was taken in, and the intersections of race and class that locate him as one of the students who are then bused in this particular moment in the late 60s and early 1970s. And so, for me, the first kind of thing that I kind of interacted with was 1999. And the sort of rap that he has in 1999, in which he's explicitly referring to class. It was something that, for me, I could really relate to being the scholarship kid at a private school. But for him, of course, too, it's all bound up with all these other types of questions, with class, with race, with gender, all at the same time. So, you know, this one's for the rich, not the greedy. Or not all of them, just the greedy, the ones that don't know how to give. And so you look at him as thinking of himself as a star, as somebody who's rich at that particular point. But it's clear that his affinities are with folks who are coming from a similar type of background as he is, and that's reflected, I think, in all the folks that he chooses to work with over the course of the years, in terms of people who are in his bands, and people who are around him, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's on the one hand, there's kind of a way to think about his bohemian subcultural politics as being a kind of, you know, a form of interracial class critique, to think about the artist class and what it means to engage in a kind of countercultural resistance to certain forms of capitalism. But the other ways that you were talking so brilliantly about racial capitalism in relation to Prince is that, given the fact that he, you know, with the spectacular and spectacularly painful Warner Brothers struggle, you know, was trying to really hail us to think about, you know, the 400-year history of, you know, class exploitation in the New World, you know, by way of trafficking humans. And so I think, you know, we have to think really expansively and historically about the kinds of interventions that he was making intersectionally in relation to class politics and how that affects, you know, the most marginalized and black and brown bodies. Thank you for that.
Hi, my name is Allison Bloomster, and I actually work here at the U in CLA, so this is pretty awesome. Thanks for doing this. My question is, we talk about the theme here is Prince from Minneapolis, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts are in terms of him being from this place, from the Northland here in Minnesota, where it snows sometimes in April. What kind of impact that had on the class, the race, the music, and the fact that he kept coming back here, and you know, for his inspiration or whatnot. How did that have an interplay with his lyrics and how he developed sort of his sentiments around race and class?
You were talking a lot about that.
I don't think that I could respond to that as well as you could, and as well as other folks will this week. Having not grown up, I wouldn't be able to tell you the nuances of it. I can tell you how it looked from my vantage point, from the outside. Is you know, New York and for somebody growing up in Hawaii, Los Angeles looms very large. There's a lot of traffic between California and Honolulu culturally, and then of course for us hearing hip hop, I think at the end of the 70s into the early 80s becomes sort of this crazy revelation in some ways, because even in a place that was majority people of color, whiteness was still hegemonic. And so seeing black and, you know, Afro-Latino kids, Puerto Rican kids coming with their own kind of language and walk and talk and all that kind of thing was a revelation to us. So LA and New York being those primary types of things that we are fed and worldwide fed as the nodes of American culture, as American popular culture. For me, coming up in Honolulu in the early 80s, and then being able to hear all of this amazing music coming out. Again, on the one hand, like Prince, The Time, the Minneapolis sound, but also Husker Du and The Replacements and Soul Asylum and all the other incredible punk rock. And thinking of all of this happening in the same place was mind-blowing. It actually gave us a sense that we could be from a small place, an out-of-the-way place, and generate a hell of a lot of creativity and buzz. You know, we related, I think, to Minneapolis in that kind of a way. And I think that when we look at Prince's activism and sort of the idea of him not being like a Belafonte and choosing to be behind the scenes, I don't know if that's sort of like, if you would say that that's sort of Minnesota nice or that kind of thing. But I thought it was really interesting that he never that it seemed to me to make sense in the context of him always coming back and to like holding Minneapolis dear, holding the Twin Cities dear, like that he never, that was the way that he kept it real. And it didn't have to be this sort of braggadocious type of, this is where I'm from, in the way that hip hop folks would have put it. It was just a very quiet, like, yeah, that's me, of course that's me. And so for him to relate, to understand what's going on in St. Louis, to understand what's going on in Baltimore, to understand what's going on in Oakland, we felt an affinity in that way. What's happening in Detroit, what's happening in all of these different types of areas, which is really where the movement is coming from these days because of resegregation. I think that he could see that being from a place that was not New York or Los Angeles or some other kind of cultural hub, San Francisco.
There's some great speakers this week who will be addressing this topic, and there were great folks at our conference at Yale last year. Michelangelo Matos, who's based here, Zahir Ali, a couple of other folks were talking specifically about Minnesota in terms of placemaking and Prince's identity formation, so look out for that work. I think the Harry analogy is kind of funny to me because he was Harry Belafonte.
Oh, yeah.
Because he was Frontlines, but he did a lot of stuff in the back too.
Harry did.
He totally
Oh yeah,
did.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I think that Harry consciously puts himself in the middle, and we have
did,
access to Harry.
Right. I mean,
know what
we're
I
not doing a Harry thing right now, but I mean,
we could do a whole Harry
We
conference.
should, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, he also used his iconicity as a certain kind of literal capital, for grassroots, emergency.
No, absolutely.
Needs, right? Yeah. So
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
kind of a
both and.
different.
Yeah, it's
there was a
both
little
and.
bit of like Prince maybe had the privilege of being able to work the edges and the margins because of some of the work that Harry did around
Absolutely.
culture and liberation.
Yeah.
But I think it's so fascinating to think of him in that genealogical line and how we wish we had him as long as we've had Harry.
Yes.
We want to hold on to.
Yes, absolutely.
Hi.
Hey, Daphne.
You have
It's
one
Amy
more-
Brown.
Amy
Good to
Brown.
see you. I loved your talk about the role of children. That was awesome. Jeff, I'm wondering if you can say a little bit more about the comparisons with Jimi Hendrix when you said there was a quote that one critic said that Prince might be the biggest crossover artist since Hendrix. And I'm writing a biography of Hendrix, so I want to hear more.
Okay. Well, I mean, Hendrix grew up Hendrix, became popular in a place, of course, that was also predominantly white and still is. And I think that, Hendrix was sort of trying to find his space to play and eventually leaves Seattle, even though he's associated with Seattle, to find his fame. What's amazing is how Prince is able to make Minneapolis the place, so that people end up coming there. And it could be because of the ways in which he was able to cannily leverage the clout that he had been able to build up in the industry, 4 albums in a way that Hendrix never could do the same for Seattle. But that particular quote was from Howard Bloom, who was his brilliant publicist and who was charged with literally trying to figure out how to cross over Prince to white audiences. And what I was using that kind of quote to illustrate was the way in which, because it's kind of hard to imagine now, but to, again, illustrate the way in which culture was so segregated at that particular moment. And so, aside from the musical sort of legacies that Prince kind of channels, in terms of his guitar work and his sort of rock god type of thing, I think that you can look at this as sort of Prince being the next progression from Jimi Hendrix, whose life too was interrupted all too early.
Well, also in terms of their politics of alterity. I mean, they both were, I think I'm so pleased that Afrofuturism is a word that now ends up on BET. I mean, that's great that it's in the public sphere. I want to be careful with how we use it because there are many different strains of it. But certainly in terms of thinking of just kind of, hyper, forms of alterity that allow you to imagine, resistant, strategies of world making. I think that's very much, parallel in terms of their sonic formalistic strategies, as well as kind of the ideological content of what they each were doing. But, he was wary of the comparison for all sorts of reasons, as in flattening out blackness and conflating black folks with one another and not being able to see the specificity and distinctions of what they were doing. But of course, he was also deeply engaged with his entire repertoire, so.
Yeah. I think that's why I love the Rick James quote so much, that Prince was this little science fiction creep.
Yeah, right.
Because, it's sort of telling, actually, in a really weird way. The hip-hop generation sort of styles or forms of masculinity.
Yeah.
Rick would have been, the dude who was keeping it real.
Right.
And instead, Prince, is coming in this sort of post-hip-hop era back, and that's why I think that pop is in this Prince moment right now, as a way of kind of breaking all of that type of stuff down and offering all these possibilities, like, again, sort of Combahee River as like an originary type of point for the moment that we're in now as well.
Yeah,
and Prince being able to advance that culturally in so many kinds of ways from his possession.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important to keep in mind the potency of that Black feminist context in the 70s, what it meant culturally and how it manifested itself, even if not always overtly, if people weren't necessarily reading the Combahee River Collective statement, the energy around that just production of just prodigious literary and cultural talent that spread itself into the pop sphere through Grace Jones, through Chaka, right, through LaBelle, were all, powerful kinds of structures in which, Prince, he was listening to everything. He was so omnivorous, so that was a really important, I think, touchstone for him.
Okay, I think I'm very sorry to cut you off, Jeff. That's a horrible thing to do. We do have to vacate the room by 7 o'clock. It will take a little while for us to leave the room. Jeff will be signing books just outside. You're welcome to stay however long you want outside of the room. But we have been asked to leave the room at some point. So I'm going to invite Stan. When you're giving a hand to Daphne and Jeff, you're also going to give a hand for Stan, who's our DJ from Belgium, who will be providing the musical scaffolding. Thanks, everyone, and see you tomorrow morning in the Humphrey Building.